All right, welcome to Utopia, an applied history with Yang En and myself. I'm Jeremy, Mr. Green. We're going to split this up into a couple of parts. I'm going to start first, and then Yang En will take over, and then we will close it down together. Okay. Right. To begin, as is the tradition in Audacity, we are more interested in finding good questions than we are in having comprehensive answers. Right. So the belief is questions you cannot answer are usually far better for you than answers you cannot question. Questions you cannot answer are usually far better for you than answers you cannot question. I think we come from a very long era of having very definitive answers, very authoritative answers, which worked fine. But I think in this new norm that we're going towards, it's not about revisiting answers we already know, but looking for new questions that might open new pathways. So some of the questions that we've been asking over the last couple of years, for example, why is globalism and multilateralism breaking down? Why are projections for climate change worsening dramatically every year? Why are evolutionists dominating physics, especially if you look at the last few years at the Nobel Prize? What will happen to humans after AI singularity in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And the question we would like to raise today is, where is our utopia? So we'll break down the presentation into three parts. First, we'll take a brief history of utopia with yours truly. And then Yang En will look at where we are today. And then together we will share on transitions in the near future.
Oh yeah, did anyone else put the face sticker? I sent to some people. It's actually a sticker given by EDB over 10 years ago. I think they were trying to promote made in Singapore products or something.
This presentation is about utopia and applied history. Next slide. We'll start with asking the questions. Based out of the philosophy that questions you cannot answer are usually far better for you than answers you cannot question. That's a quote from Harari's most recent book. Next slide. These are some of the questions that we started asking around 2018 as part of the Audacity exploration in the last 2 or 3 years. We asked a question about globalism. We asked questions about climate change. We asked a question about where the bulk of the research focus has been going through in physics. And especially we ask about AI singularity and the role for humans in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. And for this presentation, the question we want to focus on is where is our utopia? Next slide, please. We'll break down the presentation into 3 parts. I'll do the first part, which is a brief history of utopia. Yang En will share with you on where we are today. And together we will wrap up the session with transitions and a view of the near future. Next slide. It hasn't moved. Oh, okay. Yeah, no. Oh.
Yeah. We can start off with a poll question. The first poll question on utopia. All right, so we have some interactive component for all our audience here as well. So we'll start off with 2 first questions before we actually move on. So the first is whether can a utopia ever exist? So yes, no, maybe, pretty straightforward. And which country do you perceive to be the closest to utopia? So just take some time, take a minute to just like log in your responses.
Can you guys see all the options for the second question? How many options do you see on your screen right now?
I think if altogether about six options.
Okay. Do you want to share results?
Yeah, let's share the results.
Ooh, Interesting. We have a date split between the question, can a utopia ever exist? About half the people who answered said yes, and 43% said yes, 43% said no. So it's a dead heat in this audience. And the remainder said maybe. So I think we're right on the edge, right at the precipice. So maybe this presentation could change your view a little bit. And the second question, which I also found to be very interesting, is which country do you perceive to be closest to utopia? And actually the options that you have been given are the 6 countries where there are most Singaporeans living. So it's Singapore and the 5 countries that Singaporeans like to move to or have been moving to, right? So Australia, Britain, China, Malaysia, Singapore, the US. And there are no votes for Malaysia, no votes for the US.
It's because it was at the bottom. I mean, the US is a total utopia. No one saw it down there.
Some parts is, I think the PR recently has been, not the best. I think in second place is Australia. And luckily, Singapore is first. So it's not too bad, you know. Maybe some of the National Day kind of pride showing through, but at least for the purposes of today, for our poll, Singapore is regarded by our audience as the most closest to utopia. Great. Should we move? Yeah.
Yep. All right, so we have a simple exercise as well. So what we have on this slide is basically an exercise where we encourage all of you guys to create your utopia. So we have some guiding questions to help with that. Have a think about all these questions. So as we actually go through our discussion and our sharing, you guys can think about the answers, and probably we have some time for free flow discussion at the end of our presentation. So questions that will help to guide your thinking could be along the lines of how does that utopia look like? Like what are some of the reasons for choosing or forming this utopian society? What ideals and characteristics are governed by this utopia? And also think about the relationship between like the state, the market, which is the economy, as well as the community, which is all of us, people. How do they relate with one another, and how are decisions made? Yeah. Jeremy, over to you.
Okay. Right, I'll continue with my next slide. Okay, a brief history of utopia. So utopia is a term that was coined in 1516. So it's about 504 years old today. It was termed by a guy called Thomas More, Sir Thomas More, who is now the patron saint of statesmen and politicians. And I think he was also sainted by the Vatican. It comes from 2 words, from the ancient Greek, not, and the ancient Greek for place. So it literally means a place that doesn't exist, right? So for those of you who say utopia can't exist, technically you are right. I see some of the cynics like Shuray pumping their fists in victory. But for the optimists, you are also not wrong, because the common usage for utopia is a place that doesn't exist today, but is better than what we have right now, right? So when you think about it, in the year 1516, when they invented the term utopia, the average life expectancy of the country where this term came from was under 40 years old. So I think half the people in this call would be dead by now. I think literacy rates were like 7%. So 1 in 13 person could actually write their name or read. And if you wanted to travel from London to New York, it took you 10 weeks to sail, right? And it was quite a risky journey. So to a Spanish citizen living in the world's richest country in the year 1516, the year 1890, which is 350 years later, can seem like utopia, because 350 years on, life expectancy had gone up by another decade, right? And instead of taking 10 weeks or 80 days or 70 days to sail, the journey was cut down by more than half. It took you 29 days if you travel by steamship, right? So if you look at the graphic on the left-hand side of this fantastic flying objects, is a vision of a utopia painted in the year 1890 for an industrial fair, right? So they were envisioning the future in the year 1890 to be full of flying ships, men tethered to hot air balloons. And you know what? Actually, the world today, we fly much better than that, right? Yeah. So the first commercial transatlantic flight would commence 49 years after the drawing of this kind of vision. And I would say that we have far surpassed the vision of utopia. Yeah, since, next slide, please. Yeah. This is another view of utopia from the year 1959. It came from a newspaper cutting about the brilliance of the future in the Chicago Sunday Tribune, February 1st, 1959. That's not that long ago. It's only 61 years. My father was alive then. And in this vision of the utopia, knowledge and information was free-flowing, and every family could have an electronic home library which contained vast quantities of knowledge. The text is a little bit small, but what they had was an idea of microfilm that could be stored at home in such large quantities that you could access like encyclopedias and vast libraries of knowledge, right? But when Kindle came out in 2007, 48 years later, it contained far more information, far more knowledge than this electronic home library concept, and it took up far less space. So again, a vision of utopia has been surpassed by actual reality. So what I would say is, no matter how great you think the future can be, more often than not, it turns out to be even better, right? Next slide, please. Yeah. So our hypothesis is that the concept of a utopia is beneficial to humanity's progress. A new compelling utopic vision will inspire and mobilize the best of us to make it happen. And when you look at the last 300 years or the last 400, 500 years since the concept of a utopia, we have set many utopias and we have surpassed those, right? And I think we will continue to set new utopias in the future, and we will continue to move and bypass those as well. Yeah. So next slide.
All right. So I think what Jeremy has covered basically is the history of utopia, right? And I think if you want to think about how we should transit to a more positive future, it helps to think about where we are today, right? So what is the current state of our global economic system? And some of you might have heard of this person called Ray Dalio. He's actually the founder of Bridgewater Associates, which is actually the largest hedge fund in the world. And he wrote this in a blog post in 2019, explaining some of the, the craziest things that have happened in our society and why they're happening and why he thinks that they are unsustainable. So is it true that the world has gone mad and the system is broken? So let's find out. So if you look at GDP, right? I mean, GDP stands for actually gross domestic product. So it actually captures the total output or the total value in terms of goods and services that a country produces. So what we have seen or what we're being told is that GDP over the years has risen and has grown, and therefore society should be richer and happier, right? But somehow within us, we just feel that it doesn't necessarily feel true. And several red flags have kind of shown up. So over the next few slides, we're going to have a look at a couple of these red flags and what they really mean. So the first red flag is this disconnect between GDP as well as wage growth. So the line that you see in red is actually showing that GDP is steadily increasing, whereas the people who are living in the economies, the people who are receiving salaries and wages are not being compensated as fairly, right? We don't see wages rising as steadily as GDP is. So this is the first red flag that we see. The next one is on rising inequality. And inequality can kind of be captured in a very simple measure, which is the proportion of income that actually goes to the top 1% in the society. So Thomas Piketty, which is a famous economist who wrote the book Capital in the 21st Century, which is a best-selling hit in the New York Times, has a couple of graphs which he's quite famous for. And one of the graphs is the one that you are actually seeing in the slides, which is the transformation of the top 1% in the United States. So the line to watch out for is actually the green line, which shows how fast the share of income going to the top 1% has been rising since the 1980s. And if you look at the graph, Piketty in fact showed that World War I and II were the only periods of time where inequality did not increase. So ever since 1980, inequality has been rising steadily. And I think we have also gotten the sensing that, politically we see populism happening, we see a lot of anti-capitalist sentiments. And the common rhetoric we're hearing is that, oh, the rich did not pay their fair share, they're not being taxed enough, the system is rigged, and they got to where they are because of things like crony capitalism, etc. So something in us is also getting a feeling that something is not right. And the next red flag that we see over here is how happiness does not correlate with GDP. So going back to the argument about GDP, we'll expect countries with higher GDP to have happier people. But those we consider as advanced economies or more advanced economies like US and UK, their people are actually not exactly happier. As such, it is not so much about the size of the pie. It's not about growing the pie and making it bigger, but rather how that pie is being sliced. And let's look at one more red flag, and that's really the global debt levels that we see across the world. So just to get the technical jargon out of the way, debt level over here means how much governments are actually borrowing to run the country or to fund specific projects. So we have seen how debts can be really dangerous in light of the sovereign debt crisis. We have heard of countries like Greece defaulting on their sovereign debt, right? And it's especially dangerous under two conditions. The first is when a country has very limited reserves and assets, such that it can't pay off the debt. And number two, if they are borrowing for the wrong reasons, right? So compare this, right? A country borrows money to refinance old debt versus a country that's borrowing to fund important projects that can reap long-term benefits. Of course, you'll say that the second one is better. But the thing is that a lot of times countries are subject to these two conditions. They don't have assets, they are borrowing for the wrong reasons. And therefore, debt is so dangerous because if they continue to borrow more and more and more, at some point, debt will just exert a negative burden on growth, on economic growth. So if you look at the graph that we see over here, the chart on the right actually is a graph by Ray Dalio, which shows the typical cycle behind the rise and decline of empires. So I think the big question we should really ask ourselves is, where are we on the big cycle now? Are we steadily going up on the upslope? Do we have more room for that to grow, and that means we can continue to borrow? Or are we already at a peak, which is right before the decline and impending economic downturn or recession? So I think that's something to think about. So I think what we can kind of realize or come to a conclusion is that, which doesn't take a genius to think about this, is that, we don't really see a future for our next generations. We don't see a future for our grandchildren, not on the environment front and also not on the economy front. GDP has been rising steadily, but we see ever more wage stagnation, poverty, rising inequality, and many more financial crises, populism, as well as the negative effects of climate change. So how do we arrive at this state, right? Like, why are we actually on this downward spiral right now? Many people would say that capitalism is the enemy. Capitalism has failed us. But I think it takes a certain level of understanding of what capitalism is as well. Are we really against capitalism just because of our current understanding of it? Are we thinking of capitalism as a pure, uncontrolled, unregulated, laissez-faire capitalism, where the state and the market is actually separate? Or do we have other definitions of capitalism that we refer to? And one helpful resource is actually just looking back at history, right? History offers some important lessons and insights for us as to how capitalism has evolved over the years and how economic thinking has also changed. So if you look at this interesting graph over here, at the past 70 years, you can actually split into two dominant forms of capitalism over two main blocks of time. So the first is actually the golden age of capitalism, which is post-World War II. If you think about post-World War II, right, there was a clear need for a lot of governments to rebuild national economies for the better. They accepted that they had a vital role to play in terms of driving and directing economies. And that means really investing in infrastructure, investing in healthcare, investing in education, investing in innovation and transformation of industries. And in general, the system worked very well, right? Until the 1970s, there was a lot of optimism, trade was improving, and economic revival was actually happening. And then there was a period of time during the 1970s and 1980s where there were a couple of oil shocks and what the economy deems as stagflation. So stagflation is basically where you have stagnant economic growth and inflation at the same time, which means basically not doing so well, right? So during that period of time, there was actually a group of economists that got together and they wanted to change the way the economic thinking was being discussed. They argued that state control was ineffective, state control was bureaucratic and inefficient. And this group of economists, later known to be the Chicago School of Economic Thinking, began calling for minimum government intervention. They didn't want governments to be involved because they felt that markets were always right and free market is the best way to allocate resources, right? And this actually led to the next wave of the age of market capitalism from 1980s to what we see today. So I think many people will be familiar with the terms like laissez-faire or free market economics, and that's actually where it came from. Neoclassical or Chicago School economics really started in the 1980s, where people called for lower taxes and lesser government intervention. But has market capitalism actually served us well? I think that's a question that we should ask. And if you look at the past crises that happened, right? So dot-com crisis or the global financial crisis of 2008, we see that it happened because of a lot of under-regulation of financial markets. We see that there was a lot of debt-driven consumer spending because of low interest rates, and all these are unsustainable. But yet we keep telling ourselves that this narrative of growth is better for us. We keep thinking that free markets, lesser government intervention is better for us. If you look at this next slide over here, what the stats or what the data actually shows us is that the golden age saw better performance on almost every measure compared to the age of market capitalism. And you can see from the rate of GDP growth, you can see from the level of unemployment, which goes to show that some level of state activism is actually helpful. Not everything should be just left to the markets on its own. And the chart on the right actually shows that. So it shows how wealth to the top 1% has actually changed over the years. And during the golden age of capitalism, we see that a lot of workers actually got a bigger share of economic gains, which is what we want, right? We want wealth to be shared equally amongst everyone who has a stake. Whereas in the age of market capitalism, you see that the wealth is gradually going back to the top 1%, and inequality really starts to exacerbate. So is this a case of modern economics gone wrong, right? With all this bashing of free market economics, does it mean that modern economics is no longer applicable? Does it mean that the principles set out by Adam Smith, who many would consider to be the father of modern economics, are irrelevant anymore? Or are we just interpreting it the wrong way, right? If we look at the invisible hand, it's actually a famous concept that was coined by Adam Smith. And many people will think that it's about free competition, open trade, and minimal government interference. But is that necessarily true? If you read like The Wealth of Nations, what you realize is that it's actually underpinned by a lot of other values like efficiency, balance, and justice. And fairness has to be a core part of economic activities. We often think that we can just leave things to this all-powerful, invisible hand, right? That's working for the greater good of society. But maybe the reality for us is that it requires a very visible hand to promote society's interests. And then we hear the term of free market. What does free market really mean? Like, does it mean total unrestrained freedom of the markets? If you think about that, perhaps if we take it literally, we would really end up in complete chaos, right? Because just imagine companies being allowed to do anything that they want, short of physical violence to increase profits. That would lead to complete chaos. You have tobacco companies selling cigarettes to kids in schools without any age restrictions. So maybe what free market really means is not a total unrestrained freedom, but basically every market will still abide by some form of rules and boundaries without having excessive regulation by the government, not necessarily no regulation by the government. So if others talk about capitalism, like should we discard capitalism altogether and start from a new slate? Or what we require is basically some form of variant of capitalism, something that is more purposeful, something that's more enlightened, something which is echoed by Joseph Stiglitz, which is one of the Nobel Prize winners in economics. So you mentioned that capitalism will be part of the story, and but it can't be the kind of capitalism that we've had in the last 40 years. If you do that, you end up with what has happened in the US, with not just inequality, but also the opioid crisis. You have companies and large corporations denying that there's climate change, tobacco companies denying that cigarettes are bad for health, and instance after instance of what could only be called reprehensible and immoral behavior. So what options are available for us, right? If you come to think about it, capitalism actually comes in many different forms. It's not just a single mono definition. And I think this chart puts it quite nicely. It shows you two extremes. So one where the state has actually a lot of control in society, and the other where the state has no control and it's totally being run by private organizations. And maybe what we're interested in is not so much about the two extremes, but basically what lies in the middle that is interesting for us. So I'm just going to point out a couple of established variants of capitalism that we have seen. Probably the ones that we are most familiar with. The Anglo-Saxon, which is the dominant free market thinking, is actually being practiced in the US and UK. And it's also known as the liberal kind of market shareholder capitalism. So they care about people who own the shares and own stakes in the company, and is dominated by neoliberal democracy. On the other hand, you have the Nordic kind of capitalism, which is stakeholder capitalism. So it means caring about the welfare and of the employees and the workers who are in the firms. And it's a lot more coordinated. So the state has a role to play and plays quite an active role in ensuring that there's social balance, fairness, and justice. And then we have the kind of system that most of us grew up with and are familiar with, the Singaporean state capitalism, where most of the macroeconomic planning is actually state-led, so it's led by the government. And in terms of our institutional arrangements, it's a lot closer to the Nordic model. So governments retain a part of the control, but yet at the same time allowing private sector to innovate and become more efficient. So there's actually a recent panel that's really quite interesting. For those who are interested, you can give it a watch, and they actually ask very, very pertinent questions. So they ask questions like, what role should the state play in society? Should governments be bigger following crises like COVID-19? And I'm so proud of our DPM, Taman, who actually represented us in this panel. And he said one thing which was really quite impactful, right? He said that the question actually isn't about whether states are big or not. It doesn't help whether you have a bigger government or you have a smaller government. But the main thing, if there's anything that the crisis has taught us, is that the government has a role to play, not trying to do everything, but focusing on the things that matter. And what are the things that matter, you might ask, right? So things like healthcare, education are fundamental public goods that should be enjoyed by everyone, regardless of your socioeconomic status. And it's important for governments to have that renewed sense of moral purpose and also the spirit of activism. And activism in this sense really means organizing private sector players, driving a sense of collective responsibility, right? We all don't want to live in a state whereby, because the government tells me to do A and I do A, right? But a more efficient way to govern the state and how the state relates to the private sector would be the government has a particular agenda, and perhaps they could incentivize private corporations to do something that will encourage us to do good for society in general, right? So I think one of the key takeaways is really to focus and reprioritize on the things that really matter for society, and the government has a role to play in that. It has to be a coordinated effort by the state, the market, as well as the community itself. So after all this discussion, I think we need to ask ourselves what kind of system we really want, right? Are we looking for an economy that is fairer, that is more inclusive, less exploitative, less destructive of society and the planet. And if we want to envision a different kind of society, we need to measure the correct thing as well. Very often, we are driven by the things we measure, right? The outcome or the output. And because for many years now, the dominant thing that we measure is gross domestic product, all of our efforts actually channeled towards GDP growth, right? We prioritize on the economy only, about the profits that are gained by corporations and whatnot. But if we want to imagine a different society, we need to measure the things that we care about, right? So apart from GDP, are there other indicators that should be prioritized? Are there other things that we should look at? And I think some of the terms here are not foreign to all of us. Things like Human Development Index, we've probably heard of it. It's actually a summary measure of the key dimensions of human development. So longevity, a long life, being knowledgeable, and also having a decent standard of living. And we see a lot of these overlaps in concepts such as blue zones as well. So the blue zones are actually areas or regions where people have been found to live a very, very long life. And they were actually interested to study the characteristics that made them have a very long life, right? So things like, interesting things like having wine at 5, exercising regularly, eating whole foods, eating plant-based foods. So I'm not sure how true these are. Maybe some people over here might have experiences living in blue zones. But it's interesting to see because the end outcome is that they want people to lead more fulfilling and longer lives, right? So if we set that as our priority and we set that as our outcome, maybe our policies will be more coordinated and would be aligned towards that. So I think before we move on to the last segment that we'll be covering, we can do a short poll. It's actually the third question that we have. So thinking about utopia and the ideals, we really want to find out which of the ideals resonate with all of you the most. So maybe we can pull out the poll questions. Yep, so which of the following utopian characteristics do you value the most? Is it about people living harmoniously? Is it about the natural world being embraced and revered? Embracing social and moral ideals? Encouraging individuality and innovation? Or society continually evolving with change to make a perfect world? So just take some time to cast your votes. Okay, maybe just like 10 more seconds. All right, shall we see the results? So most people actually voted for the last option, which is society continually evolving with change to make a perfect utopian world. So I think we talk about being a resilient society very often in Audacity as well, which means that in the event of external shocks and change, we want a society, we want systems that are robust enough to be able to react flexibly to those changes towards a better world. Right?
Yeah. I think the last one is really interesting because I don't think there are any limits to human imagination. So no matter how great a world you create, somebody else can always imagine a better version. So it's almost like a journey with no ultimate final destination. Yeah. Which is a journey I would really enjoy. Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to the last part then, where we talk about transitions and the near future.
Oh, thank you, Yang En. Yeah. Actually, on Yang En's last slide, right, I'd just like to comment that Taman, who's the senior minister in Singapore, he actually chairs the UN Human Development Committee. So I think Singapore has actually a bigger role to play than we like to imagine. Of course, as a country, we are tiny. It's a rock, right? But the fact that we are kind of, I like to think of Singapore as the capital of the emerging world, the capital of the poor world. But that's also where most people live. And I think if we engage more with our geographical neighbors and the kind of background that we all came from together, we could probably make a bigger impact than we currently do. And maybe Tarman will be the first of one of the early contributors. And I hope maybe eventually all of us could be such contributors. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm two slides down, right? Yeah. Right now, if you look at where the world is today, 2020 is such a bad year, so much bad news. It's like we flipped the switch. But actually, a lot of the stuff that's happening this year have been building for a while now, right? So I would say today where we are, based on our expectations, we are probably closer to a dystopia than a utopia, right? We have a small group. They said 30 years ago, we were talking about the 10% richest in the world, exploiting the other 90%. But now we're talking about the top 1%. And in a few more years, we'll be talking about the top 0.1%. So money is kind of being concentrated at the top, right? So right now we're talking about a small and limited group with absolute control. Wars are being fought. Lives are being lost at huge numbers to provide for a limited pool. There's a common enemy for the public to rebel and break free from. This is happening across different countries, and every different country will have a different version of it, right? I think it's very hard for us to say that there's one country that shows none of these symptoms. Yeah, even like some of the Nordic countries, right, which are regarded as kind of like the benchmark for perfect societies. They are straining with kind of like nationalism, racism, a lot of social problems as well. Yeah, a scarcity of resources, and everybody seems to want to go to a simpler times. I heard a really interesting anecdote, right? If any of you have been lost before while you're with your friends or with your family, usually when you go out with a group of friends, right, and you get lost, what you do is you try to retrace your steps, so you go back to where you were when you last saw everybody, right? So the parallel is that society has been doing the same. So the reason why Donald Trump is in power is because a lot of old people are really uncomfortable with where they are. They feel lost. So they're trying to retrace back to the 1950s, which was the last time they felt secure, right? Which is why they're trying to roll back abortion rights. They're trying to roll back anti-gay rights. Gay rights. They're trying to roll back a lot of reforms, right? They want racial segregation. So that's a quite interesting parallel. I would think it's fair to say that where we are today, we are kind of like in the pink zone, and we are moving, hopefully, in the right direction towards the blue zone. I don't think we are anywhere near that yet, but there is more energy building up for that. Next slide. This is a really interesting chart. It came out January this year, just before COVID broke out. It's a little bit small, but if you look at the 4 quadrants, right? On the top right-hand quadrant, it's called the worst quadrant, right? So these are events that have the largest likelihood of happening, and if they happen, they have the worst impact, right? And right at the top is climate action failure and extreme weather. And even a conservative like our founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew said that the ultimate threat to human survival is global warming and climate change. This is like the one biggest threat that he feared towards the last days of his life as a politician. At the opposite end, right, economic problems, terrible as they are, will not end life as we know it. For most of our 20, 30, 40, 50-year history, we are talking about economics. We talk about deflation, we talk about like recession, we talk about unemployment, but those problems have a bad impact, but life will go on, right? And then at the top left, infectious diseases. COVID-19 is one such example. It has worsened many other risks, such as food crisis, migration, social instability, and state collapse. So right now, I would say that we are closer to dystopia than our version of utopia. But what we need to do is we need to imagine a utopia. And once you can imagine, we have a direction to navigate. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. So while we were doing this, preparing for this presentation, we found a really interesting story. It was a story about Monopoly. I think all of us would have played Monopoly growing up, or most of us. What you probably didn't know was Monopoly was originally invented as a game to demonstrate the pitfalls of capitalism. Right. Next slide. This is the mother of monopoly. So she's an amazing lady called Elizabeth Maggie. When she invented it, she was 48 years old. She was never married. She was a feminist. She was an activist to stop slavery, and she wanted to reform capitalism. So she invented this game called the Landlord's Game. And under the Landlord's Game, she had two versions of this game. She had a prosperity rule and she had a monopolist rule, right? So under prosperity rule, every time someone acquired a property on monopoly, everybody gained, right? And the way to win the game is the person that starts out with the least money doubles the money. Then everybody is declared a winner. So it's like a very collaborative, everybody wins type of mindset, right? And then she had the flip side, which is to demonstrate the opposite outcomes when we don't work as a collaborative effort. Under the monopolist rules, whoever bankrupted everybody else is a sole winner. And in 1935, 31 years after she invented it, Parker Brothers copied the concept. They started selling it, and then they realized that she owned the rights, so she bought it off the estate, and then they killed off the prosperity side of the game. Which is why monopoly, the way I was taught that this is the way capitalism works, is actually so straight so far from its origin. Yeah. Next slide, please. So we want to talk about some of the alternative models that have come up. Some of these overlap one another, but we'll just kind of present with you like it's a raw form. There are quite a handful. The one that's been making a lot of headways this year came from, I think it was started by Iceland, but Scotland, New Zealand, they all kind of proposed it kind of in close, in quick succession, right? And what was interesting is they were all proposed at a time when these countries had female prime ministers. Yeah, so I think there's something to be said about having an alternative approach, an alternative lens. It's called the well-being economy. And what it is we should focus on well-being and happiness, not neglecting economics, not neglecting productivity, not neglecting GDP, but we should start first with the well-being and happiness of the citizens. Yeah. Next, please. Second model, this is also really interesting. It came from a Nobel Prize winner, Elinor Ostrom. Again, one of the few females to win a Nobel Prize in economics. I think the ladies are coming up with the more innovative and more alternative approaches right now. And her view is, if you can't stop capitalism, what you can do is you can balance it by having really strong commons. If you strengthen your global commons, if you strengthen your localized commons, that will act as a balance to capitalism, right? So what commons are like a public park, that's a common. So it's something that's shared by everyone. Or the public library, that's commons because that's shared by everyone. Oxygen is a common. Yeah, water should be a common, right? And if it sounds like very obvious, it's not really the case because water used to be for everyone, which is why they valued it at almost nothing. So what you have are big corporations buying up water rights, pumping it all at a very low price and trying to sell it at a very high price, right? And increasingly what we are seeing is the same for oxygen, air as well. Air, because it's part of the commons, it's valued as free, and because it's free, there is no value. So it's very hard to protect. So it's getting really abused. So we need to find new ways to strengthen and protect all these common kind of like assets, like fresh air, clean water, knowledge. Next slide, please. I'm going to run through the next couple ones really quickly. Amsterdam donut model. This is the one that for those of us who attended Tom Bouchard's SID framework, workshop, we are quite familiar with. That's what he built it up on. It's gaining a lot of traction now as well, especially in continental Europe. It's basically taking society and the planet before economics, right? If the planet is the golden goose, we shouldn't kill it. Next slide. This has some overlap with the earlier models. It's just a slightly different way of looking at the common good. Quite popular in Austria.
Yeah, actually, I should just add on for this slide, right? I think what's interesting is that they were advocating actually for a common good kind of balance sheet instead of the typical financial balance sheet that you see. So a lot of times, we put profit, corporations and companies put profit over anything else, above everything else. But what they're trying to advocate is, employee welfare, the dignity, the solidarity between employees, and all these will credit into doing good for the common pool of people, and they'll get plus points for doing that. So quite interesting perspective.
Yeah. This is more popular with the corporates, but so far I think it's mostly like smaller corporates or volunteer organizations that have adopted it. I think there's one more, and this is the most fun.
Yeah.
Obviously, I doubt it's going to happen, but it would be quite cool. So if capitalism is a monopoly game, we have a ceiling of 999 million. At the moment you hit that, you get a medal, and then you can go and hang the medal in your living room, and then you can go and do something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to give the concluding statement, Yang-En?
Sure. And so I think what we have covered over here in terms of alternative models is really just the tip of the iceberg. I think there are a lot of different models that people are proposing everywhere, alternative ideas that are coming up, which I think all of them have very, very plausible merits, right? All of them have good points that we can take away. And it's not so simple to just, take what is good that we see in other countries and copy and paste it to our economy. I think every country or every nation, every economy has its own context, and we shouldn't take things out of context. But how each country could possibly move forward is to find and understand where they are at now and what are the values that they want to achieve moving forward. So what are the kind of outcomes that they want to measure? And by measuring the right outcomes, which is what the people want, not just what the governments want, then they can all move towards that. I think in this final slide, it's actually a quote, quite a nice quote by Niccolò Machiavelli, who says that there's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take a lead in the introduction of a new order of things. Because the innovator has for enemies all those who have done well under the old conditions. So change is hard. We need courage to change, but because it's a hard path, it does not mean that we should shun away from it, but rather we need to face it, because let's all face it that the status quo is no longer tenable. And I really like the comic that's on the right. We see COVID, and everything. It's a lot of measures now are meant to kind of mitigate the effects of COVID. But what we don't realize is that if we don't take the right steps forward, we're going to face even bigger challenges, right? This is just the minimum viable catastrophe that we see. We're going to have recession. We're going to be faced with the effects of climate change, and eventually the worst of them all, biodiversity collapse. So let's not be drawn up by that wave. Yeah. And we'll just end off with some recommended reads that we found useful for preparing for this as well. So these are some of the good books. We have other articles that we would love to share. We couldn't show everything here, but if you're interested in any of these conversations, debates, or discussions, you can drop us a ping at unleash@offhaven.co, and we'll be happy to discuss. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about the economies that we need to kind of actually understand and take note of, because we keep talking about innovations and technology, but I guess having this in mind, we kind of need to think about the utopia that we also want to direct our innovations to. So the next segment, we will be having Xiu Zi from JTC, Xuan Hui, and our young innovators, Jun Yong and Zheming and Alan, to talk about what it's like to be prototyping in Singapore, taking Made in Singapore to the new level. ST, are you here?